Yes. So we will now start with this week's. So today we want to go from the Adhisthana to the Prayana, meaning we have a journey. There is a journey, not in this life alone. There is a journey of our life itself. So that is what we are going to see beginning today. In the next 2-3 sessions, we will see that. So so far we saw this foundational things. Today we'll see this sojourn of our life. That is the idea for today. So the question is, what is this journey that we are talking about? First, let us get a little sense of what is this journey that we are talking about, and then get into the details of this journey. So we'll look at some pramanas for it. Is there what kind of journey are we talking about? Let us look at some of the pramanas which are existing, because then okay, let us say, oh, this is what we are talking about. You look at Bhajagovindam, it says punarapi jananam punarapi maranam punarapi janani jatare shayanam iha samsare bagudustare kripaya pare pahi murare. I mean, clearly Shankaracharya says that there is a cycle of birth and death. Punarapi jananam and maranam, janani jatare shayanam. Every time there is a mother, through a mother's womb we come, and then we get into the samsara. That is what Bhajagovindam says, that there is a possibility of this happening again and again. In Viveka Chudamani, in the first shloka, as he started after the prayer, then the first shloka ends only like this. It says, Muktirno shatakoti janmasu kritaihi punyaihi vinalabhyate. Unless without that punya that we have aggregated over shatakoti janma. Koti is 10 power 7. Shata is another 100. So, if you take numerically this number, Shankaracharya is saying the punya that you accumulated over 10 power 9 janmas, and each janma is designed lifetime is 100 years, so 10 power 11 human years is what we are talking. So mukti does not come without accumulating this punya over a long time, which is what in Viveka Chudamani he started the magnum opus with this shloka. If you look at Gita in chapter 7, this is the 19th shloka. It says, Bahunam janmanam ante jnanavan mam prapadyate Vasudevaha sarvamiti samhatma sudurlabha. Bahunam janmanam ante. After so many, at the end of so many janmas, the jnani reaches unto me. He does prapatti to me. He reaches unto me. He understands Vasudeva sarvamiti. Everything, is a law of conservation of divinity that we are talking. Everything is nothing but Vasudeva only. So we get that kind of feeling, and such kind of Mahatmas are very rare. So in fact, there are plenty of references. So the Pramanas are there in the Veda, the Pramanas are there in Dharma Shastras, Puranas, wherever you want to see, you will find. And how are the Pramanas established in Puranas? In Mahabharata, every story is told. What was he in the Purva Janma? What happened? Why did he take this thing, birth again? Why did Sishupala was killed by Krishna, or Kamsa was killed by Krishna? Why was Kumbhakarna killed and Ravana killed by Rama? So the Pramanas are told in different ways, but all of them are pointing to the fact that we don't have one Janma business. It is a journey which spans across several Janmas. Now, that is one way. Let's also try to use a little bit of logic. Let us bring a little logic also, because sometimes all these must add up. Because one of the questions they ask, sir, why should we use logic? Why should we use logic? Can we not take just faith? No, we can add more and more ammunition into our thinking. In management, we talk about what is called triangulation. We never come to a conclusion with one method. we use three methods, and if all the three methods are pointing to the same thing, it's called triangulation, then the results are likely to be more stable and more firm. In the same way, that's one method. That is pramanas, shabdas or parama pramanas, we can take it. Let's look at it from another side also. So I want to post in front of you a few things. In 1967, if I remember, 67, 68, 69, that time, there was a 2-year-old boy. His grandfather was called Gotuvadyam Narayana Iyengar. So this Gotuvadyam Narayana Iyengar, when he, in that concert in Bangalore and these places, at the end of the concert, sometime during the concert, his grandson actually, who is now a big musician, he is a very, very, very knowledgeable musician. He's a child prodigy. So this 2-year-old boy, the Gotuvadyam Narayana Iyengar will slightly play a tune, and this boy will identify ragas, about 300 plus ragas, just like that. Now, I read this story about 10, 12 years back. There is one village in Tamil Nadu. This girl started talking. 1.5 years is when the kids started slowly, words start coming out. So this girl, when she started talking, she was murmuring something. So they didn't understand. What is this small little girl trying to say? So after a little bit of effort, finally they found this girl is actually reciting the entire Thirukkural, 1330 verses simply. Now the question is, who taught them? When did they teach? The child is born, and today also, even now there are a lot of WhatsApps I'm seeing. Some 1-year-old child doing some tabla or some music. We constantly see these. How are we going to explain this? Where did they learn? Or is it that the God, when he, in a very figuratively speaking, when he threw the soul from the heavens down into the earth, he wired this, each of the soul with some sort of capabilities. They are all fantasy. We can take all of them only with some fantasy. There must be something more logical to explaining all this. How do you explain this? Buddha's father was not a Buddha. What I'm saying is, Buddha's father could never be a Buddha. If Buddha had a son, the son can never be a Buddha. In other words, it is not your voice, your skin of the color, your look and feel, the kind of diseases that you can contract. All these can come from a parent. They are all hereditary. But whether you will evolve and then attain moksha in this janma is not hereditary. It's not even DNA. The DNA is only for the pancha koshas. Annamaya kosha, pranamaya kosha, manonmaya kosha, vijnanamaya kosha, not even pancha kosha, 4 koshas. But what you are talking about is something. So where did it all come from? How did it all get transferred? Now, this Aurobindo, I don't know, Sir Aurobindo, I don't know how many of you know this story. Aurobindo was, his father did not want this. He had 3 or 4 sons. Aurobindo was the 3rd, I think. He did not want them to study anything Indian. So he put them in Darjeeling in some place. When Aurobindo was at the age of 7, along with the 2 other elder brothers, they were sent to UK, because Aurobindo's father wanted this son to become an ICS, and he wanted them not to imbibe any of these Indian values and so on. Aurobindo, lives there for 14 years, formative years in UK. They taught a lot of Christian values. You can go and read all of them. Yet he turns out to be the biggest philosopher of India. All these could not stop him becoming like that. So how do you explain all these? Because your normal logic, your scientific and all that don't explain any of this that is written here. So there must be something more. There must be something which is extra, beyond the Indriyas and beyond the domain of science, which can only explain all this. Otherwise, you cannot explain many of these things. They are all mysteries for us. That's one side. So let us look at one more. Suppose, let us think of a person A who committed a crime. It can be, crime or goodness. I have put that footnote at the bottom. I'm taking commitment here. I mean, crime here, but it can be punishment, goodness also. Person A committed a crime which deserved a certain punishment. I give you three scenarios. A escaped the punishment as his turn for punishment never came. Counter closed. I did punishment. I committed some crime. I was not handed down the punishment. Before that, it was over. So I escaped. Scenario 2. Giving punishment is a daily affair. Today's cases are not carried over tomorrow. I stood in the queue. Before my turn came, the day was over. Tomorrow, I just escaped. This is another possibility. Third possibility, A committed crime, but B was given the punishment. In other words, number of punishments equal to number of crimes, but no mapping, one-to-one mapping. Think about this possibility. This is one possibility. Let's look at another possibility. Person A committed a crime which deserved a punishment. Nobody, we lay a rule, nobody can ever escape the punishment or the reward, as the case may be. System works continuously. It's foolproof. Nobody can escape. Number 2, it's a daily affair, of course, but there is a robust system of carryover of the cases to any future period. Now, in America, they call it as a rain check. If you're not able to collect your, your item today, you can pick up a rain check. It will come on some other day and then, take it. The same way, this person cannot run away. Suppose there is a system like that. Then there is a third. A committed the crime. A alone will get the punishment. In other words, there is a system to tag A, so that even if he comes back, I will have a barcode reader and find out that this person is actually A and immediately hand him down the punishment. So think of these two systems. Very clearly, I think system on the right is very fair. System on the left is not fair. In other words, people commit a lot of mistakes in this Janma, and people ask me, sir, they just go away. They just escape. No, they can't escape. And we have to have a system by which we are able to catch them, tag them, and put them back. So this is what I mean. An act of goodness also I should be rewarded. As much as an act of crime, I should be punished. So think about this scenario and think about which one is a better system. One more. We already talked about it in one of the question answers or somewhere I mentioned. You enter into a game. The rules of the game are as follows. First rule is you have only one attempt. Sorry, you have only one chance. You try with all your might. Good luck or bad luck, that's the end of the story. You will not be given any prior practice, no learning, etc., etc. are not possible. You have to come and play the game. That's all. 3. Entry fee for the game is very high. You have no choice, but you have to pay the fee. You don't even have a choice to say I will not play the game. This is the third rule. Think of a game like that. Think of another game in contrast, which is what I talked about as a game you see in village fairs. You are given 3 rings for ₹30. You can make 3 attempts. Obviously, it means you can make 3 attempts. You keep throwing it. And as you keep throwing it, if it falls on something, that's yours. Now, even in this simple game, there are 3 chances. So again, I would like to play the game. If you give me a choice, I will not enter into the game on the left side. But then you have forced me also to enter. But if you give me a choice, I won't. I would say this is a better, fair game. I think I can try a few times and hopefully improve, and then sort of hopefully win. If I don't win also, I'm okay. So between the two, to me, it looks like the rules of the game on the right are much better, as much as we saw in the earlier example. So this is where the problem of single chance, whether it is a game or game of life, whichever way you want to take it. The problem with the single chance are as follows. My performance is judged by just one observation. And in today, in university examinations, in educational system, this is impossible. You have to have what is called continuous internal assessment. A person must be judged by observing him more than once. That's a fair system. When I was studying in the university, one chance. There is one end semester examination, that's it. Today, it's not like that. There is a continuous assessment, which means if you don't do well in the first component, you have an opportunity to improve on second component, right? In the single chance, all those are gone. and post the event I'll be handed over the rewards or punishments. So I'm told you will be given. In some of the other religions, this is the kind of framework. They say that there's a judgment day and then you will be given. I mean, that's that's a slightly less interesting idea for me. You give me more chances, I want to play and I want to win the game. I don't want to lose the game and then have this feeling of I have lost the game forever. Please give me some 1,000 chances. I will play and win the game. That's a better system. Okay. Third, who is going to give this punishment or reward, where and when? All accusations that the Western religions are making about the Hindu Sanatan Dharma, what is this Naraka, what is this Swarga, what is this other world, same problem comes here also. I do not know. I mean, it is not Pratyaksha. I don't know. Who is giving this, where is the judgment day, who is giving, I can ask the same questions. So it doesn't suffer any differently on this count. At least the system may be a little more fairer, appears logical. The other point is, if you give me only one chance, and especially I don't know when I will receive the reward or punishment, that I'm not even here at that time, then my motivation for a fair game is very less. Fair play. Why should I do? Because I don't know what is, I mean, reward and all, let us see. When it is coming, let us see. Now, it's only one chance. We will smart the system and go. That kind of a feeling can come if you play with one chance. That's going to be very, very risky affair, actually. The next biggest problem is how to explain defects at the starting point. A child is born, we'll come to that question very soon. A child is born with a lot of diseases at the time of birth. A child is born at the poorest of the poor family, and you are asking the child to play the game with a fellow who is born in a millionaire's house. Both of them are given only one chance. I mean, it's not a level playing field. It's actually a very unlevel playing field. Is never level. That problem has to be solved. So if we have to solve all these problems, the logical answer is it cannot be a one chance. That's a very, very sort of a narrow system. We need something better. We need something more logical, more meaningful. So our game, all these you can translate it to game of life. Please, I leave it as an exercise to you. You reflect on these thoughts. Everything I said about this, casually about these games and the examinations and all that, please reflect on your game of life. So in our game of life, what do we need? We need more than one chance to win the game, first of all. If you just give me one chance, I am not at all happy. I'll grudgingly play the game. I am not happy. Sorry. And I need a very fair system and rules of the game. I don't find that there is scope for improvement in all the rules which I played out so far in front of you. I am not happy. If you ask me, I'll write a slightly better rules of the game and give you. So we need a fairer system and rules of the game. And I need a very robust system to maintain scores and monitor progress, especially if you're talking of a continuity. If you give me more than one chance, then the third is very important. You should you should have a way by which the scores are maintained properly, progress is properly monitored, and all that. If you provide all these, that game is a fair game of life. And I will be willing to invest. I will be willing to play the game. In fact, our Sanatan Dharma does exactly that. Our cardinal principles of Sanatan Dharma stems out of these three building blocks.